I want to draw your attention to something very interesting and specific having to do with the process of learning a language. Some people, having learned a language for many, many years, experience an effective plateau. They have no idea how to progress forward, and it's really, really frustrating, and I can resonate with that. There is one thing that we need to realize about the nature of speaking a language so that we can move ahead with our language-related progress. And that thing is the feeling of a language, or the logic of thought that is inherent in every language. Why do we need to know about that? The reason why we need to know about that is that it allows us to progress ahead and reach our fluency. What we tend to do instead, if we're unaware of the difference in logic in different languages, is we try to transfer the logic of our first language onto the logic of the second language that we're learning. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to superimpose the logic of our language 1 onto language 2. And very often what we end up experiencing is native speakers of the language that we want to speak, our second language, being unable to understand what we're trying to say. And that is a very, very frustrating experience. You may have found yourself in a situation when you're in a gathering and you're talking to a native speaker of English, and you've been learning English for 10 years straight. And that native speaker of English with their non-verbal language is leaning a little bit towards you because they might be feeling that your language is difficult to understand. So the idea that you're trying to convey might be difficult for them to grasp. And that is really, really frustrating. It happens due to the fact that when we're learning our first language, we bathe in it. All right? So the intrinsic grammar sense, the internal grammar, how we structure our thoughts, how we create the grammar of that first language, becomes inherent in how we speak that language. One thing we don't really understand is that for an English native speaker, for instance, we'll be speaking about English today. For an English native speaker, there is a very clear distinction between all those various tenses that we try to glean so diligently when we're learning the English language. For instance, I come from a Russian-speaking background, and in Russian there are 3 major tenses. We have the present tense, we have the past tense, and we have the future tense. The basics are the same for the English language, but one difference that exists in the English language is that there are nuances to the various tenses that people use when they describe their experiences. And for a Russian-speaking person who has come from a Russian-speaking background, for instance, and you can also transfer this onto the first language that you have grown up with, the feeling system of the tenses is extremely different. It's very, very different. It's a completely different story. Therefore, for a Russian speaker, for instance, there is no big deal whether you're saying something in a present perfect scenario or if you're putting that expression into past simple words. For many years in psychology and linguistics, it used to be thought that how we think is a combinatorial process. It used to be thought and believed that the human mind just collects a number of words when we're learning our first language, and later on for the rest of our lives we tend to combine those words in sequences, creating what we now know as coherent speech. But there is something very weird about that theory, and that something is something that I'm going to share with you right now. Think about this. It's true that we may be able to recognize and process a large number of various words and expressions. But how about this? If you think about the nature of thought, you might be able to notice that what comes first, before the verbalized expression, is an idea or a feeling impulse of what you're going to say. And that feeling impulse comes with a shade of understanding. So you're understanding very clearly what it is that you want to say, all right? And later on, if you choose to do so, you choose to verbalize that idea, that energetic impulse that comes first. And for that, you use words. Check this out. Have you ever found yourself in a situation when you had a written assignment and you had an idea for that assignment? So you sat down and you started typing away on your keyboard. And what you were trying to do is you were trying to convey that idea, to pass that idea on. After you had finished the typing away process, you looked at your screen and noticed that what you had typed there did not correspond with the idea, the original idea that you wanted to convey in the first place. There were some words clearly from that domain of that topic that you were writing about, but the truth was that those words did not communicate the idea that you wanted to convey. And that realization, that insight, in terms of not being able to communicate what you wanted with those exact words that you had chosen for that task, that very idea was present as an impulse, and also that understanding was present as a eureka kind of insight type of moment. In order to get better at making distinctions with the language, we need to start feeling into the distinctions. We need to start feeling into the language. The first thing that you have to do if you want to follow this approach, which I find is very profound because it addresses the issue from the fundamental basics, right? So what you want to do if you want to follow this approach is you have to start feeling into the impulse or the energetic idea that comes before you verbalize anything and you speak it out in words. Notice that, for a mental experiment's sake, it would be possible, and it is possible, to think without actually verbalizing the things that you want to say. It's actually possible to think in impulses. That will be a better way of thinking, by the way, because it's less energy consuming and it's less demanding on your energy resource. So by doing that, by applying and implementing that approach, you'll be able to clarify your mind of unnecessary verbal chatter. So see if you can do that and leave me a comment down below telling me if you can actually grasp the feeling of an impulse that precedes a verbal spoken phrase, be it a phrase spoken in the privacy of your own mind or something brought up to the surface and spoken in sound waves and sounding across the room. If we want to train ourselves in fluency and in comprehensibility so that everyone who we speak to can understand us appropriately, what we need to train ourselves in is little distinctions that are not currently present in our logic of thought, in our first language. We need to start developing those tiny little distinctions in the English language. For instance, provided that we're aware of the grammar base of the English language and we have learnt all the rules, but still we feel that we're somehow unable to use those rules when we actually speak, when we do this speaking performance. What we need to do is we need to start drawing distinctions between those grammar tenses. Otherwise, we won't be able to produce a precise and accurate grammar tense in the moment that calls for that particular tense. The same goes for vocabulary. One reason why we cannot really enrich our vocabulary with myriads of various expressions that we so conscientiously glean in our vocabulary books is that we don't create those distinctions between the synonyms, and synonyms exist for a reason. I want you to think about a pair of synonyms such as understand and realize. If you were to translate understand and realize into your first language, it's very likely that you're going to notice that the translation word, the equivalent word, will be the same. Something along the lines of understanding, grasping, getting an understanding of something, right? So knowing about the inner workings of something. If you were to look into the distinctions between understand and realize, as a native English speaker feels it, you might be able to notice that to understand means a general understanding of things. So it's a generic word, whereas to realize might mean getting an insight, which is a momentary understanding or insight or realization. Having a grammar base with rules is of critical import if you want to apply this method. It's necessary to have learned a little bit about the English grammar, maybe by working out the major distinctions on an intellectual level between various tenses, so that you can actually start training yourself in the feeling of those distinctions on a perceptual, on an experiential level. So if your level of English is intermediate and your concern is that you're unable to progress to the next level, this would have to be the approach that I want to nudge you to take. The approach of feeling into the distinctions and making the distinctions between the various linguistic forms and shapes and incarnations that your words take in the language when you speak it. Notice that not necessarily can you transfer the first language's logic system of thought and language creation into your second language, logic of thought and language creation. To finish with this video, here are a couple of resources I'd like to recommend to you if you're interested in this approach. The first one is a video lecture done by actualize.org titled Learning Equals Making Distinctions. And the second resource is Steven Pinker's The Language Instinct book, which you can get from Amazon or any bookshop of your choice. Those talk exactly about the process of making distinctions and how crucial this process is for learning. And also those resources talk about this feeling impulse that precedes a verbal form that a thought or an idea takes after it comes into the field of your consciousness. If you enjoyed this content, make sure you click the like button and subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to share this video with a friend, but only if you feel that the content is relevant and up to the point in your life. I will see you soon. That was Lilia. Ta-ta for now.